Lord of Mysteries Fire of Destruction Chapter 419 to 425. Opening his eyes back up in his body, Klein found himself in front of the bathroom door. Getting up from the toilet he had used as a seat for the tarot club, the detective took a few calm steps to the mirror above the sink. Looking at his reflection and the slight smile on his lips, the magician sighed and shook his head. The transmigrator meeting had gone much better than he had expected. Not only did he finally confirm Adrian Kenway's status, but he also obtained a great deal of high-level information. The truth of religion, divinity and humanity, the true name of the emperor, a little more information about the transmigrator before Russell, an invitation to participate in the tower. Rubbing his forehead a little, he even had to admit that it was too much for such a short chat. That's not counting the unspoken information. The true creator and the creator that the Silver City venerates are related. Although Joa had mentioned it by chance, the detective immediately noticed the problem. Why would someone following the creator and was called his most beloved angel be following the true creator in the fourth epic? He still remembered how the first time he called the true creator the fallen creator, the man had said it was the most appropriate way to refer to him. Perhaps the true creator is the creator that the City of Silver venerated, but something caused him to fall. Joa had not delved into the subject, just saying it was complicated. However, there could be several reasons why the man had not said it was dangerous to investigate. One is that it was relatively safe. However, considering the level of existence of those involved, this is not very likely. The one that Klein preferred was repeating the man's words. The situation with the creator was so complicated that there was no way he could think of anything dangerous. Of course, even if Joa didn't say it was dangerous, that doesn't mean I'll investigate or inquire. These are gods and angels. Why should I, A-Week Sequence 7, get involved? I don't have to risk my life for that. It's an unnecessary risk I don't have to take. Besides, it's not like I don't have someone who already knows what happened. When the time was right, his partner, his soul brother would share what he had about the creator. For now, Klein didn't have to worry about the subject. His main objective now would only be to find a way to act to digest his potion. I know that two of the rules of a magician are, to receive the praise of an audience, and the other would be that, a magician never performs unprepared. I can try to find other rules based on these two. It may take a while, but as long as I can digest it, it will be fine. Sighing slightly, the detective wet his face with water. Then, he left the bathroom to put the sign back on his door stating that the consultation hour was open. He still needed the money. Wayne Enterprise, Harvey Wayne office. Holding his head a little dizzy, the young entrepreneur blinked a little. Whoa. That's new. It seems that spending a long time in Saphira Castle is not a good idea. Good thing I asked for the chat to end already. Continuing with his performance, he yawned, somewhat bored, and stretched out in his seat. Several bones in his back and arms popped satisfactorily. Ah, I needed that. Groaning happily, the man smiled weakly. Are you done with your nap? Turning to his side and seeing his beloved worm, Adrian winked and got up from his seat. Sorry, I'm late. Did no one come? No. It seems they took your request that the rest hour is sacred to the heart. I doubt they'll bother us. Flora replied without taking her eyes off the window, resting her chin on the palm of her hand. She was the man's personal guard. A chair and desk were placed near the window at the side of the office. Grabbing the coffee pot and filling 2 cups, Adrian didn't even blink when, as was usual, one of them disappeared from view. But he couldn't help a smile growing on his face. 1, 2 and counting in his head, the dark-haired man closed his eyes in anticipation. A soft sip reached his ears. Bleh. Frowning, the white-haired woman looked at the man in offense. You forgot the sugar. Next time, wait a little longer before drinking your coffee. Adrian laughed a little as he carried the sugar in his left hand to the woman's table and placed it beside her. Huffing indignantly, Flora grabbed the spoon and, with fluid elegance, added 4 spoonfuls of sugar to her cup. It's your job. You're my cook. If you can't make my coffee how I like it in 5 seconds, I'll have no choice but to fire you. She scolded with her eyes closed as she stirred the coffee gracefully. Oh, I didn't know you were in a position to fire someone. Who gave you the promotion? Rolling his eyes, the man returned to his seat while gently sipping his cup. Flora smiled elegantly and tilted her head slightly to one side, her white, curly hair falling gently to one side. I'm your wife, aren't I? You're supposed to pamper me then. Cough. Cough. Coffee shot out of his nose, and the man could only cough hard while beating his chest. Stunned, Adrian turned around and looked at his companion. But Flora had returned her attention to the window. Her cup was on her lips, and her left cheek relaxed in her palm. But, through the reflection in the window, he could see how the woman was looking at him out of the corner of her eye. After a few moments, the dark-haired man could only laugh in disbelief and shook his head. Letting go of his cup and letting the strings hold it in the air, Adrian made an elegant gentleman's bow. As you say, my queen. Next time, I'll make sure I sweeten your coffee properly. In the reflection in the window, he could see how his companion's gray eyes rolled, half exasperated, half pleased, and he laughed again. With their game over, Adrian grabbed his cup from the air and returned to his seat. Calmly, he took a handkerchief out of his pocket and cleaned his face. With that done, he gently sipped his coffee and couldn't help comparing it to the one he had tasted a while ago. Joe's coffee tastes different, a little more mellow, perhaps. I have to ask him about the recipe. Letting his mind wander a little, the dark-haired man considered today a very good day. Finally, he had been able to truly interact with the fool. No tricks, no secrets, two human beings who don't belong here talking honestly. Adrian thought it was a good time for both of them. No doubt the detective had been holding his curiosity for a long time, having finally found the opportunity to express it, the guy hadn't stopped talking. He had tried to answer his questions honestly and as best he could. Although, it's not like I was very honest, Adrian thought mischievously, barely able to stop the corners of his lips from rising. Throughout the conversation, he had been sincere. There were many parts where he had not. I didn't lie about why I transmigrated. It's just that I would never admit what the book was about. Who knows what would happen if I dared to tell him? What kind of reaction it may cause? That knowledge was the very definition of the unknown. Only one being had it and it was him. And Adrian doubted that would change. Not wanting to think about it anymore, the man returned to the subject of his meeting with the fool. Although Klein's questions were expected, the conspirator made sure to take them to areas that would make the man ask even more questions. In this way, Adrian ensured that apart from being a chat between brothers of the earth, it was also a profound lesson. With all the unknowns to come, it was much better for the detective to be as aware as possible. Of course, as much as he could be made aware. There were two things that he had not mentioned to the man. There are two things that Adrian could not risk telling him yet. The first was the fact that the demoness set was trying to do something in Lindbergh. Since they were receiving help from the useless writer, Adrian didn't want to risk a character from a previous story knowing something about it and triggering a reaction. The second is that Lenevis was dead and had become the vessel of descent of the true creator. Although Klein was now aware of the vessel, he did not know that one of his mortal enemies had suffered a fate worse than death for it to happen. He didn't tell him because it wasn't the right time. That information was too heavy to include in their first conversation and not at all appropriate, maybe after 2 or 3 conversations, but not the first one. The first conversation he had with Klein was something he had been planning for a long time. Adrian knew what he wanted to say in that conversation, what he did not want to say, and what he wanted to achieve with it. The conversation could be divided into 2 essential things. First, to ensure that Klein no longer felt so alone and suffered in solitude. Second, to prepare the man for the blow of the truth of this world. That is why he had revealed the year he had transmigrated. In the man's subconscious, a seed of an idea had already been planted, along with the foundations for forming a wall. In the future, Klein will occasionally consider the time dilation between transmigrations. Although he already knew he had lost 5 years, an unconscious thought will always be. Was it really only 5 years? What if it was more? With those thoughts occasionally passing through his head, the wall would grow, and when the horrible truth came knocking, he would be better prepared to face it. Of course, Adrian knew the man might hate him when he found out, but honestly, he would face it head on when that day came. Sometimes, to protect the people we care about, we must lie. What a shitty quote. Although the quote bothered him, in this case, it was the best it could be. It may sound cruel, but Klein's rapid advancement of the sequences was due to the combination of his desire for revenge and his immense desire to return home. Without one of them, the most important one above all, the speed would undoubtedly be reduced. Something this world cannot afford. It's not just the war that can be brought forward, with tensions rising between Intis and Loan, the latter being in an awkward situation after the moonless night. Who's to say the apocalypse can't come sooner too? Klein's speed of digestion could not be slowed down, it even had to be accelerated as much as possible. That's why he hadn't hesitated to tell so much information in their little meeting, something he planned to do in every meeting they had from now on, in fact. This world needed a lord of mysteries. The KND on the outside wouldn't back down easily. Adrian knew that it would take a miracle for the planet to survive the coming confrontation. Point 1. Even if he managed to emerge victorious over the evil spirit and the primordial demoness and become the calamity of destruction, he alone could not hold back 9 gu and 1 pillar. The incarnation of calamities could never protect the planet as it needed to, it clashed with its symbolism. If the Earth wanted a chance to survive, a pillar must be born. A chill ran down his spine, and the entrepreneur could only sigh softly and close his eyes, enjoying his coffee in silence. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. City of Silver, daytime. In front of one of the city's exits, under the watchful and unblinking gaze of the guards on the walls, an expedition group was leaving. This will be my second expedition as a bard. With one hand on his shapeshifter staff, Derek Berg breathed gently as his eyes scanned the surroundings intently. The formation they were using was arrow-shaped. The tallest members were on the left and right, while the shortest were the arrowheads, holding multiple lamps to light the way and keep the darkness at bay. Although Derek now had a powerful sealed artifact, he was still Sequence 9, so he was one of those with the great responsibility of holding up the lamps and ensuring they didn't go out. This time, the expedition was to explore and check old roads to the ruins of the villages surrounding the City of Silver. This was merely to secure the terrain for a deeper exploration by a larger team. This expedition was not very dangerous, so it was a good opportunity for the less experienced to get a taste of what they would find once they left the city's safe zones. Of course, just because there weren't many dangers, it wasn't safe. For a moment, Derek's attention was drawn to the tip of the formation. Elder Lovia led the front. Her long black robe, embroidered with mysterious purple patterns, danced somberly in the wind. The shadows under her feet seemed to dance gently, like a dark pool, ready to release something at any moment. Unlike the rest who stayed in the light, the woman stayed at the edge of it. Between light and dark, most of her body in the dark. Because of her shadow-related abilities, this was the best way to use them to the fullest despite the danger it entailed. Shaking his head slightly, the young teenager focused all his attention on the task at hand. Nervous. A small whisper came from his side, and Derek turned his head slightly. Unconsciously, he couldn't help but smile a little. Due to the City of Silver's limited environment, the population could not grow much. The number of people of a certain age was adequate, and although Derek would not dare to say that he knew everyone, he had seen most of his age group. Dark Regents had been a fellow expedition member before and was by far the one he knew best on the current one. The young man was of average height and somewhat chubby. He was cheerful, optimistic, and undoubtedly strong. As usual, his face wore a friendly smile. He was currently the warrior of Sequence 9 of the Giant Pathway. Also, recently, Derek could consider him one of his first true friends. Due to Mr. Chariot's advice, together with the negative effect of the shapeshifter staff, the young son was forced to interact with many more people when he went to the training ground on the outskirts of Silver City. That was where he had met the warrior again, who was always friendly and the first to strike up a conversation. From that conversation until today, Dark didn't seem to leave him alone. His parents had died almost 2 months ago, and this had made him become silent and withdrawn. He couldn't do much in the face of this onslaught. Before he knew it, he was already looking forward to meeting his first friend in the field to train together. With a friendly smile showing all his teeth, Dark Regents looked at him unconcerned. There's no need to be nervous because I'm here. There's nothing to be afraid of. The slightly chubby young man tapped him on the shoulder a couple of times. The lamp in his left hand shone softly. Why are you here? Are you a hero in armor coming to save me? Laughing softly, Derek playfully returned the tap. At the word, hero, Dark's blue eyes sparkled like precious stones, and he whispered a little more loudly, someday I will be the hero who will bring the City of Silver out of this torment. Just look at me. Please, take this expedition seriously. The soft but firm voice made the duo freeze and look embarrassed at the front of the formation. Elder Lovia did not turn her head, she looked at them sideways calmly, wait until we make camp to talk. All the members of the formation gave them sideways glances before returning to their guard. Derek and Dark could only nod tensely at the reprimand, clearly embarrassed. The young bard glanced at his friend Warrior, who could only smile apologetically. Not wanting to push their luck and knowing this was not the time for games or chats, they returned to their posts. Grua. Gruoa. A few growls came from the dark vegetation at the side of the road. Immediately, the formation on the right raised their weapons while the formation on the left focused on watching their backs. Monsters often drew attention to one point only for another group to attack from behind, so one had to be prepared for this. Seeing that combat was about to descend upon them, Derek grabbed the shapeshifter staff with his free hand and quickly turned the handle. With a click, a 1-meter sword appeared in his right hand, and a soft murmur escaped his lips just as he began to stamp his feet to a certain rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. Slowly but quickly gathering speed, the slight anxiety that had fallen over the group was disappearing like a shadow hiding from the light. Having found his tempo, Derek opened his mouth and began to sing. Awaken strength in my soul, courage that the wind calls. May my body be swift and fierce, and my spirit, the most pure. With the force of thunder, my power, with the agility of the wind, I will run. May courage be my faithful shield, and may my mind be clear as crystal. Each verse filled those present with courage and strength, their bodies becoming vigorous and agile. Fush. Fush. Clap. A humanoid monster, with multiple mouths covering its body and a single eye on its amorphous head, shot out of the dark undergrowth and could barely take a few steps before being cut in half by the weapons of the front group. In the rear, 4-legged monsters shot out of the forest, their speed such that they were nothing more than blurs. But, a few meters from reaching their targets, they stumbled upon their own shadows. Before they could get up, their own shadows revealed against them, imprisoning them in black tentacles. Slash. Claw. Boom. Like the humanoid monster, these were quickly dealt with. Keep your guard up, and don't abandon your posts. Elder Lovia ordered with hard eyes. Yes, Elder Lovia. The expedition group followed the leader's orders. It had been a long time since the monsters first appeared, and several other confrontations passed and ended just as quickly. With Bard Derek's chant strengthening everyone present and the occasional support of Elder Lovia, these monsters, while not weak, had no chance of doing more than annoy and were quickly dispelled. Now, the expedition group took a short break in a small clearing before continuing. Sitting a few meters from one of the many campfires that lit up the clearing, Derek calmly ate his rations. Dark, who was sitting opposite him, looked at him, somewhat astonished and with shining eyes. I heard from the previous group you were in that your new singing powers had been quite useful, but I didn't think they were that useful. I never felt as strong as when listening to your voice. What's your path called? It's the first time I've come across these abilities. Almost trembling with excitement, the young man approached Derek and whispered. Where did you buy it? Was it one of the lower channels? Derek smiled and nodded slightly. Its name is the Sun Pathway. A kind man sold me the Sequence 9 potion formula in exchange for some materials I had at home. He was wearing a strange tunic, so I couldn't get a good look at his appearance. The smile on Dark's face tightened for a moment. Grumbling, he bit into his rations. Seriously, that's all. Everyone who goes to the lower canals dresses like that. It was not unusual for some potion formulas to suddenly appear in unofficial canals within the Silver City. Some became the basis of strong families from generation to generation. That was because people kept part of the spoils private. As long as it wasn't too important, captains and senior officers would tacitly overlook it. While doing so was not a problem, many preferred maintaining their privacy when making these deals. Derek only smiled in response, but a sudden chill made him look to one side. In the distance and with her hands clasped in her lap, Elder Lovia looked at him with expressionless eyes. The young man tensed a little, but remembering Chariot's words, he took a deep breath and smiled cheerfully at the woman, his eyes shining. He raised one hand and turned it to greet her. Hey, Elder Lovia. How are you? The woman, taken somewhat by surprise, did not seem to have expected that movement and looked at him, slightly lost. Without saying anything, Elder Lovia nodded gently and returned her attention to the fire in front of her, a deep look in her eyes that had been lost in the orange flames. Dark looked at what his most recent friend had done, and he could only press his lips together somewhat uncomfortably. Seeing that the older woman had turned her attention, he approached Derek and grabbed his arm with some force. Hey, I wouldn't do that if I were you. The warrior whispered. Why? Is it wrong for me to greet her? The young man murmured confusedly. He understood that Elder Lovia had always been strange, with her random emotional swings and strange episodes, but there was no need to act like that. Dark felt a little lost for a moment before he realized, of course, you were never very social, so you don't know. There's a very recent rumor that Elder Lovia ate her husband in one of her episodes a long time ago. What kind of stupid rumor is that? Derek whispered, completely outraged, but Dark's quick signals made him lower his voice. Someone so loyal to the City of Silver that she was willing to sell her soul to an evil god so that the city would have a chance to escape this nightmare and go to the world of light doing such a crazy thing. Never. Derek might not have been the most perceptive or attentive, but even he could see how ridiculous it was. This was a slap in the face of Elder Lovia's efforts and of everything the City of Silver stood for. Barely able to control his fury, the young son grabbed his friend's forearm and squeezed it tightly, eliciting a surprised groan from his companion. Approaching to within just over 20 centimeters of his face, Derek looked with a fiery gaze at Dark, who had paled a little. Those are just meaningless rumors, Elder Lovia would never do that. Do you really think she could be roaming free in the city streets if such an atrocity were true? There's no way the Council of Six would allow it. What you are saying not only insults the efforts Elder Lovia makes every day for the City of Silver but the Council's ability. Don't be delusional, Dark, and use your head to think. Barely containing his voice, Derek finally released his friend's arm and looked to one side, breathing heavily. The young warrior brought his sore arm against his body, his dazed gaze focused on the once shy and reserved young man. His mouth opened and closed several more times, but no words came out. Looking around and hoping that nobody had heard them, Dark could only look on in embarrassment as some of the expedition members who were closest to them looked at him sideways. Knowing that the situation could worsen if he spoke, the warrior hung his head in shame. I'm sorry, Derek. I spoke without thinking. Pressing his lips together a little, the young man could only shake his head with a sigh. Just don't do it again, okay? Don't disrespect Elder Lovia or talk about rumors with no head or legs, they're just lies. I will. Dark nodded sadly before laughing uneasily. By the creator, Derek. When did you grow up so much? Now I feel like I'm the child. We all have roles to play, don't we? Derek sighed softly. I can't continue being a child if I want to fulfill mine. Finishing their chat, the duo fell back into silence, waiting for the break to end and the expedition to begin again. A few meters away from them, hidden in the shadows, a fleshy blood-red ear that had appeared at some point sank back into the shadows. Elder Lovia raised her head and glanced at Derek and Dark. Her eyes were no longer disinterested, and they had a certain gleam. Lowen Kingdom, Backland. Empress Burrow. Holding the newspaper in her hands, Audrey Hall could not contain the joyful squeal that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Unable to help it, the young gem reread the headline for the umpteenth time. Espionage and incitement to violence. Ambassador Bakerland arrested. Chi. Her legs kicked happily in the air, a brilliant smile on her face. Jumping up from her bed, her hair completely disheveled, Audrey held out the newspaper to her best friend. Look, Susie, we did it. We caught the rat. Biting the huge bone with some elegance, dog Susie tilted her head to one side, her tail calmly wagging. Her bright brown eyes looked at her curiously. I don't quite understand. But if it makes you happy, it makes me happy too. Woof. No sooner said than done, Susie wasted no more time and returned to her arduous work of chewing her huge bone. Seeing this, Audrey just put a hand to her mouth and laughed softly. As soon as they entered the privacy of her room, her best friend set to work on gnawing the bone that Chariot's messenger had given her. It was, by far, her favorite activity. Sometimes I wonder if she doesn't get tired of it. Isn't it tiring to chew the same thing every day? She had hardly made any progress. Although, if she put herself in her shoes, maybe that bone tasted really good. It seemed that her thoughts were not as silent as she thought as Susie stopped chewing for a moment and hugged her most precious treasure with her little paws. Get yours, she shouted, lowering her head and pouting very much like her. Holding her hands up in defense, Audrey laughed uneasily. I wasn't going to do anything, Susie. Don't worry, that bone is yours and yours alone. Squinting her eyes intensely, the spectator dog just looked at her deeply for several seconds before, smiling. Good. Immediately after saying that, Susie happily returned to eating, her tail wagging joyfully. It took a few moments before Audrey understood what had just happened. Did I just get bullied by a dog? The corners of her mouth twitched a little. When Chariot said I was a mouse, I thought he was just trying to annoy me. But if I can't even stand up to my pet, is that a bad comparison? Not wanting to think or imagine that she agreed with the man, she lay down on her bed, her gaze fixed on the ceiling of her room. Quote. Straightening up and grabbing the newspaper from earlier, Audrey looked at the headline, confused and somewhat concerned. Why did the kingdom choose to publish that Bakerland had been arrested and that he was a spy? The first thing she could understand. The party-loving ambassador, being as well-known as he was, they would find it very hard to hide the fact that he had been arrested. But revealing that he was a spy. She didn't understand that. Audrey couldn't help but have a bad feeling about this. Elsewhere in Empress Borough, Matched House. Putting down the newspaper and glancing at his wife, who nodded calmly, the head of the family could only sigh inwardly. How long do you think we'll have? Madame Matched murmured. If we're lucky, a year. But with how things are going in the kingdom, it's bound to be shorter. Maybe 9 months. Rubbing his forehead with a handkerchief, the man could only sigh. The revelation of Ambassador Bakerland as a spy was undoubtedly the first public blow to the Intis Republic. It was only a matter of time before Intis responded. I pray it's after Hazel goes to Lindbergh. Maury Matched tapped his chest 4 times. Neither parent doubted that their daughter would be admitted. They were both sure she would succeed. Not only was she extremely intelligent and capable, her creativity and tenacity meant that neither of them feared for her future. Even if she never married, Hazel could easily lead the various companies that her father and mother would leave her. But for that to happen, she had to grow up. With the possibility of war on the horizon, they would both feel much safer if Hazel was in Lindbergh. Although Lindbergh did not have very good relations with the Intis Republic either, they were undoubtedly much better compared to the Loan Kingdom. Like the security of the country, it was not to be underestimated. Once Hazel entered the University of Wisdom, the possibility of something happening to her in the coming conflict was greatly reduced. Sighing slightly, Rihanna took the newspaper from her husband's hands and looked at it for several moments. The pound has already fallen by 3%. It is very likely to fall much further. I wouldn't be surprised if the pound isn't the strongest currency in the world by next year. Maury replied reluctantly. This was what happened when you placed a large part of your economy in such a delicate and cheap-handed area. If something happened to that place, the price you would pay if you didn't have some kind of backup was serious. Rihanna nodded with a solemn expression. She put the newspaper in her hand back on her husband's desk and returned to her seat. We should be able to pay for her studies without any problem. But it wouldn't be a bad idea to start setting aside a little of our earnings in case something happens. Good idea. I'll also see if I can find her a place to live in the meantime. Before the pound drops any further in value, we should use it to its full potential while we can. Somewhere in the Sonia Sea. Alger Wilson stood at the bow of his ship, his eyes locked on the dense fog that surrounded him. Not even the crimson moon in the sky was able to pierce it. It had been about 20 minutes since the ship had entered the fog, and it shouldn't take long to get out of it. As a seafarer, he could feel and see the currents of the sea and the air, and he knew how to use them to the maximum to increase the ship's speed. In addition to his extensive experience as a pirate, a journey of at least 12 days was reduced to a short trip of 4 days. Which would leave him with a few days rest for the pirate audition. Something his men would no doubt appreciate. Looking around and barely able to see 5 meters ahead through the thick fog surrounding them, Alger calmly turned the rudder towards a slower current. Stay alert, he shouted to his men, his sharp eyes trying to see through the gray veil but failing. At their speed, if they hit something, it could cause problems. Although the Blue Avenger was a ghost ship that could repair itself and was highly resistant, Alger would not take any chances. A seafarer never underestimates the sea. That was one of the main rules of acting that he had discovered after going through several storms and dodging a few others. The weather at sea had been varied over the last few years, with storms and fog covering areas for days before leaving. This was quite common. Before, Alger didn't give much importance to these events, but with the information he now possessed, he couldn't avoid seeing these natural events in a different light. Old gods rose from their dreams, and evil gods returned to where they belonged. Perhaps this is the planet's way of announcing that times are changing. Thinking about it for a while, the man could only sigh and put such thoughts aside. Turning his attention back to piloting the boat, he calmly turned the rudder to the left, making sure to stay in the slower current. A small stretch of the route appeared in his mind, and he frowned slightly. A moment ago, the current direction changed. Turning a little more to the right and maintaining that course. If it continued like this, there was no doubt they would soon be off course. This was not unusual, but it stood out a little with the calm waters. Following his instinct, the seafarer looked at the ship's highest point and shouted, "Seal! Do you see anything?" One of his men had climbed the rigging and was up on the foredeck. This had been done some time ago to guide them in case there was better visibility. If anyone had a chance of seeing anything, it was him. It took a few seconds, but soon, there was an incredulous cry from a man. "G ground ho! To the north." "What?" Alger stared in amazement at the thick curtain of fog that prevented him from seeing what was ahead. Had they reached land so soon? The seafarer's mind quickly went over the nautical maps he had read, as if it were possible that there was an island nearby, and that was what his man had seen. But, with a deep chill, Alger noticed that the nearest island was miles to the south. It's not that close. It could also not be an undocumented island. He had passed through this area many times and could not remember ever encountering an island there. The possibility of them being lost in the fog was much less. Alger's knowledge of navigation and instinctive awareness of currents and winds ensured that, as long as he was at the helm of the Blue Avenger, it would never be lost. The calm, dense fog around them had become colder and more suffocating in his eyes, as if something within it was hiding and stalking them. Quickly, Alger turned the wheel and set the Blue Avenger on the fastest currents but in the opposite direction. He then used his control over the water to accelerate the boat even more. "Everyone, to your posts. Prepare for battle." His voice thundered through the ship like thunder in the sky. His men quickly followed his command and readied the cannons. Whatever his man had seen was close, that there were other dangers hidden was almost certain. As an experienced seaman, Alger kept calm even though he couldn't see anything. His heightened senses as a seafarer kept him focused on the job at hand. Get out of this fog. The gentle shifting of the currents together with the whisper of the wind silently guided him, knowing how important it was that he be attentive. None of his men made any noise, they just held their weapons and looked around on guard. This tense and suffocating atmosphere lasted for several minutes, as Alger speeded the boat as fast as he could and his men kept guard. After 20 minutes, the Blue Avenger broke through the fog. But before anyone could say anything, all the crew looked dazed at the horizon. The crimson moon in the sky illuminated a large group of islands with calm and grace. The captain recognized them almost immediately. That was where the pirate audition would take place. We were 4 days away. How did we get here so fast? Knowing where the answer might be, Alger turned his head and looked back in the direction from which they had come. The thick curtain of fog was already dissipating, but if before he could see nothing, now he could see a little through it, and what he saw terrified him. A colossal silhouette of an island could be seen through that mirage, a size such that it looked like a floating city. But it only lasted a few seconds. The rapidly dissipating fog took that vision with it. It couldn't have taken more than 4 seconds to disappear. What was that? Barely containing his trembling, Alger turned back to look at his men, who stared dazedly at the scene before them. Shaking his head, his grip on the wheel became a little tighter. Get ready to disembark. Right now, the waters were too dangerous to sleep in tonight. Looking at herself in the mirror, Serena let out a trembling sigh, her vision blurred and painful moans coming from her throat. She was now in her room. The curtains were closed, keeping out the sunlight, and everything was illuminated by a few lighted lamps. Raising a trembling hand to her side, she tried to do her usual movement of touching her ribs again, as she had recently had to do. She had to sink her fingers in quite a bit to touch. It hurt a little. Having done that, Serena lowered her hand and traced it over her scars which, although they were still visible, were not so much as to stand out in bright red, they almost merged with the color of her skin. The spots that had previously adorned her skin were also completely gone. No trace of them remaining with their departure. Serena was no longer able to recognize the woman in the mirror. A short while ago she had finished her most recent appointment with Opera, who had gladly told her that her treatment was now complete. She was at an ideal weight and in a stable physical condition to take the potion. Finally, wiping her eyes with her wrist, Serena got dressed again and went to her cabinet. Opening it and seeing the altar hidden inside, she could only sigh softly. Carefully, she took the altar out of its hiding place and placed it in the middle of her room, on top of the carpet in front of her bed. Looking at her hands and seeing that they were trembling slightly, The woman was not very alarmed, she just closed her eyes. Focusing her attention on emptying her mind, she did not move and her chest barely moved with her slow breathing. Slowly opening her eyes, the black-haired woman calmly grabbed the box of matches she had placed next to the altar and, taking one out, she lit it. With this one, she lit all the red candles. Kneeling calmly in front of the altar, Serena closed her eyes and joined her hands in front of her face. The prayer that she had practiced so much left her lips. Although she did not understand what she was saying, she knew its meaning. These were the words to warn the monarch that she was ready to receive the potion. The scarlet monarch who burns depravity. The calamity forgotten by time. The stranger who comes from the unknown, Blua. Stuttering at the end, Serena could only bite her tongue in frustration. Despite how many times she had practiced and repeated the sentence with her new leader, she still couldn't avoid stumbling at the end. Again. Again. She growled with blurred eyes, her lips tightly pressed in fury. Her tongue was crushed between her teeth. Her tongue hurt a little, but the woman didn't care in the slightest. She had experienced pain and torture much worse than this. Not only in the cave but when she was kidnapped. And who saved her from that? Adrian Kenway. How could she dare to make such a horrible mistake as this? There is no forgiveness. Unforgivable. Her hands began to tremble and quickly became fists. Her nails dug into her palms, but she didn't care. This was what she deserved for being a failure, a great and enormous failure. Anything less than perfection is unacceptable. If I want to be able to follow him without being left behind, I have to prove my worth. I have to be perfect in everything. I can't just make a fool of myself at something as easy as this. This is unacceptable. I can't keep making mistakes like this. Suddenly, every thought that crossed her mind was cut off when in front of her, a flash of flames came out of nowhere and completely engulfed her. Without even having time to blink or scream, before she knew it, Serena found herself in a mysterious space filled with yellowish smoke. I don't have to read minds to know what you're thinking, child. Tell me, what's tormenting you at this hour? Freezing before the strange but powerful voice, the woman slowly turned her head to one side. There, standing easily a head taller than her, was someone. He was a man wearing a tunic that obscured all his features except his nose and mouth. He wore armor of black and bloody rusty metal. His body emitted a feeling of oppression that made her knees tremble and she wanted to prostrate herself before such a superior being. Serena immediately knew who it was that was at her side. The Scarlet Monarch. With all her might she fought the instinct to prostrate herself. Her knees trembled with the effort but she managed it. Her savior had said that such formalities were unnecessary with him, so she tried to follow his advice. However, she could not help but make a deep and exaggerated bow to the great being. It is a great honor to be in your presence, my lord. It is a pleasure to meet you too, Serena Williams. Adrian has told me a little about you. With a chuckle, he added, would you mind walking with me for a moment? There are some things we need to talk about. He has been talking about me to his lord. Feeling her heart about to burst, Serena gave a nervous nod. It would be my honor, lord. Straightening up even more, Serena followed the calm pace of the Scarlet Monarch, always 2 to 4 steps behind, not daring to walk beside him. Even though she knew she shouldn't, she couldn't help but quickly look around. The yellowish smoke seemed to cover everything. Apart from the Scarlet Monarch and herself, nothing could be seen, just an endless curtain of yellowish smoke. She couldn't help but feel slightly confused. She remembered seeing a city when her savior showed her the sacrificial ritual. The city is not something I can show to normal people. After chilling a bit, Serena turned her attention back to God, who was looking at her over his shoulder with a small smile. Was that because you were looking around confused? Quote. Sorry if I overstepped, Lord. Serena murmured apologetically. The monarch shook his head. It's okay. Maybe when you're stronger, I'll let you see it, but now it's impossible for you. Strong. Mumbling silently, the woman only nodded slightly. Do you have any idea which pathway Adrian has planned for you to take? The god asked calmly, his gaze always ahead. Serena pressed her lips together and shook her head gently. And no, my lord. Which one is it? The Scarlet Monarch nodded, having expected that answer. It is the path of the secret supplicant. A bold decision indeed. Serena did not quite understand what the god was talking about. Was there something strange about the path her savior chose for her? And why would that be, my lord? Not so long ago, it was considered the easiest pathway to lose control. The monarch said softly, if the situation hadn't changed with that guy, we wouldn't be talking right now. I would have told him to choose another path for you. That guy. I don't think he's referring to Mr. Adrian, so it has to be someone else. But who? And, which path was the easiest to lose control on? Although Serena's mind was a ball of threads at the moment, she didn't let it show. If there was one thing she couldn't fail at, it was this. Excuse me, Lord. You said it was, so it is no longer so. Serena swallowed before continuing, then there should be no problem using the pathway Mr. Adrian chose for me. Her savior would not give her something she couldn't bear or that would risk her life, although the latter didn't matter much to her. She fully trusted that he only wanted the best for her. I don't know how to read or write. I'm not very intelligent or tenacious either. In that respect, little Jerry is much better than me. She could easily be my daughter, but she is much more intelligent than I am. Hee hee. Coo. Biting her lips hard, Serena refused to break down here. So, holding herself back, she continued in a dry and painful voice. I know it was only because of Mr. Adrian's big heart that I'm even alive here, but I don't want it to be that way. My life has never made sense. And I don't think it ever will. I've grown tired of trying to give it one after so much senseless suffering. That's why I at least want to decide how I'm going to die. Something warm ran down her cheeks, but the woman refused to let it bother her. She was strong, and she could handle this. I want to die following my hero and savior. When I take my last breath, I want it to be with peace in my soul that I was helping the most important person in my life. The monarch just looked at her in silence, barely had she started to speak. He had stopped to listen to her. His face showed no emotion. After a few uncomfortable seconds of silence, he finally spoke. If Adrian asked you to kill yourself, would you do it? Unable to help it, her lips turned up in a happy smile. Of course. He saved my life, it's only fair that he says so too when it's over. The god said nothing for several seconds. Although the silence made Serena a little nervous, she wasn't afraid of having made a mistake. She hadn't told a lie after all, she had only spoken the purest of truths. If the day came when her savior asked her to kill herself, she wouldn't hesitate for a second to plunge the knife into her chest, rip out her heart, and offer it to him, all with a smile. Ever since he had saved her, her life was no longer her own. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity but could not have been more than 20 seconds, God finally spoke. Don't you appreciate your life? There was not much emotion behind the question, which could even be said to have been asked gently, but Serena could not help but tremble a little. Unconsciously, the woman looked down at the yellowish ground. A soft and gentle sigh was heard, revering her soul and wiping away the tears that had stained her cheeks. The monarch looked at her with great gentleness. A look that she could not help but relate to that of a loving father to his daughter. In the future, I will ask you the same question again. I hope that when that day comes, your answer will be different. Without giving her time to say anything, the monarch tapped her gently on the middle of her forehead. Ah! Startled by such a sudden movement, Serena took a step back. The last thing she saw was a small smile on the monarch's face, followed by a blaze that engulfed her. Ah, what? Blinking a little lost, Serena looked around, confused. Her room stared back at her. I will guide you in preparing the sacrificial ritual. Are you ready? A powerful and familiar voice sounded in her mind, and she froze for a moment. Alarmed, she jumped up and looked around, but no one was there. A chuckle sounded in her mind again. How about you try again? Maybe I'm behind you. Or maybe above. Feeling her lips dry along with her throat, Serena swallowed. I'm sorry, Lord. I wasn't expecting that. After her initial fright, she recognized the Scarlet Monarch's voice. The god laughed a little more, and she couldn't help but imagine him shaking his head. It's okay. It's a fairly common reaction. You don't have to worry. Are you ready to become a Beander? Yes. The answer didn't even take a second. This was something she had already decided as soon as her savior let her follow him. She would dedicate every beat of her heart and every breath to that man. Very well, the monarch said calmly. Everything is ready, all you have to do is repeat what I do. Serena said nothing, she just nodded with burning eyes. The Scarlet Monarch who burns depravity. She did not understand what the god was saying, but she could recognize the words she had said before when she prayed to him. The Scarlet Monarch who burns depravity. Serena repeated. With the voice of the Scarlet Monarch as a guide, Serena was finally able to complete the whole sentence. Although she didn't understand anything she said, the reaction it caused was something she did understand. The orange flames of the red candles flickered briefly before starting to burn white as they rose several meters into the air. Barely crossing the 2 meters, they curved and came together at a single point, forming a door of white flames. From this door, yellowish smoke began to emerge as a scene formed within the fire. A majestic city rose above the horizon, covered by that same smoke. Soldiers made of pure fire walked through it, faithfully patrolling. Above this city, resting on the clouds, was the figure of the Scarlet Monarch, in his armor of black and bloody metal, looking down at her with a small smile. Perhaps you'd like to step back a little. His lips hadn't even moved, but his voice still reached her mind. Serena nodded and took 5 steps backward. As soon as she did that, she saw several objects approaching the door at high speed. In the blink of an eye, a small pot appeared in front of the altar where she had been sitting a moment ago, along with several containers, vials, and small cloth bags. At some point, the flame door had closed, and the candles had gone out. Do you remember how Adrian showed you how to prepare the potion? I do. I even practiced with some ingredients while I was cooking. Quote. That's one way to do it. The monarch said, I'll guide you through the ingredients to prepare it. Contrary to her expectations, Serena saw a long list forming in her mind, along with images of what each vial contained. The list. No, it was better to call it the formula. It was as if the formula for the potion had always been in her head. That will only last a little while, so I recommend you get moving. As soon as she heard those words, the woman's hands had already moved to the nearest vial with the holy water and she had poured into the bowl, 30 milliliters exactly. After that, she took one of the bags and poured in the 10 grams of pure silver and the 10 olive leaves. Taking the last bag she had, Serena slowed considerably. Calmly, she opened it and carefully removed a long, pure white hair. It was quite long, and despite having been in a bag, it retained its silkiness and beautiful white color. The mere fact of touching it blurred her vision. Grief suddenly hit her, and Serena wanted to cry for the animal. But shaking the effects of the hair, she began to pull out the white hairs one by one, continuing until she had 20. Once the last hairs had been placed in the holy water, it quickly began to bleed, turning the clear water a brilliant crimson red. Knowing that this was the critical point of the potion, Serena grabbed one of the last 2 containers and opened it. Immediately, she began to sob at the sight of the white stag's ears. They were beautiful ears, covered in white hair, with something like fluff inside them. A small sample of the beauty of the animal from which they came. This time, she couldn't help crying. That something so pure had died, for this pained her to the depths of her being. But, closing her heart, she threw the fluffy little ears into the pot. She did this by simply turning the container over the pot, not believing she had enough strength to touch it. Poof! When the ears made contact with the blood inside, a dense cloud of black smoke was released and dispersed within a few seconds of being in the air. The blood in the pot had now turned a dark blue, with some white flashes in it. Following this, Serena opened the last vial of the batch. Inside, a somewhat viscous black liquid was stirring disgustingly. Holding back a scream at the sour smell, the woman held her nose and poured the entire liquid inside. Fush! One last gray cloud emerged from the pot, which, like the previous one, dissipated a few seconds after it was in the air. What remained inside the pot was a pure, crystalline light blue liquid. It seemed pure and exhibited a clean aura that calmed her soul. Serena looked at the result in wonder. This is the secret supplicant potion. It's beautiful. Licking her lips, she carefully picked up the pot. It wasn't very big, enough to make broth for one person without them asking for seconds. So she could also use it as a cup. Once you have consumed the potion, I want you to go into cogitation immediately. As soon as you have taken the last sip, do it. I will be watching you, and I will make sure nothing happens. With a subtle nod, Serena grabbed the sides of the pot and lifted it so that it was in front of her face. Yes, my lord. With those last words and a deep breath, Serena raised the cup and brought it to her lips. Gulp, gulp, gulp. Just as the potion looked, the liquid going down her throat was revitalizing and extremely refreshing, like drinking a glass of cold water on a hot summer day. Before she knew it, all that crystalline liquid was consumed. Seeing this, Serena quickly closed her eyes and began to enter a state of cogitation. Gru, Ha! Groans escaped her lips, as well as some saliva. The murmurs that her savior had mentioned had finally arrived, but they were not mere murmurs. They were powerful and stunning howls, demanding that she listen to them. They seemed like hammer blows to her brain and spirit. More saliva and a little foam came out of her mouth. Little by little, she was coming out of the delicate state of cogitation that she had achieved. Ignore the voices and focus on mine. Nothing else matters. Like shadows fleeing the light, the powerful howls disappeared as soon as the voice of the Scarlet Monarch rose above them like a beacon in the storm. In this new calm, Serena did not miss the opportunity and gave her all to enter cogitation. The veins that were pulsing in her neck and skull slowly vanished. The pain disappeared along with an inexplicable calm within her. After an unknown time, Serena opened her eyes, which now seemed to have a slight shadow over their irises, becoming darker than normal. Putting her hand to her head, the now secret supplicant blinked slowly. A decent number of honorific names now inhabited her mind. Although they were all different, almost all of them shared at least the words, depravity, observer, and true child. She knew that such entities with these names could be considered evil. The knowledge brought on by the potion explained it a little but did not go into depth on the subject. It was as if it was trying to tempt her into saying them and finding out. These names. I mustn't say them, must I? Looking up, Serena slowly looked around her. They are the names pointing to unpleasant existences. If you were to say them, they would also know you and could use the connection you created to corrupt you, infect you, or flood your brain with information. Hey, you're more attentive than you think. So that's how it is. Serena murmured slightly before nodding. Thank you for your kind words, Lord, but I am not worthy of them. If you really believe that, there's not much I can do. The god said illusorily before continuing. Now you are a secret supplicant, and therefore, I will tell you why Adrian chose this pathway for you. At that, her ears seemed to perk up, and she listened much more attentively to the great existence. As you said yourself, you can't read or write. You're not very bright, either. Your knowledge of the mystical is also extremely low. Although the potion should have given you a basic understanding of the magic of rituals and sacrifices, you are practically illiterate. By using the secret supplicant specialty, Adrian planned to solve all those problems by injecting information. Surely you realized it in your promotion, didn't you? Yes, I did. The woman nodded. Those howls had promised many things as long as she listened to them. Something she was about to do if it weren't for the monarch. Seeing that she understood, the god continued. On your way to digesting the potion, you will constantly come across names you must not say, along with information being whispered to you by mysterious entities that tempt you to say their honorific names. The plan is to use that to our advantage. From now on, whenever you hear those whispers of some existence or have free time, say my honorific name. Slowly but much faster than if you were being taught, I will give you information on everything you will need. Rituals, mystical languages, writing, along with occult history. I will give you all that as long as you pray to me. A kind of crash course. Serena muttered, somewhat dazed. Could the specialty of a path really be used for something as curious as teaching an illiterate person to learn to read and write in record time? It sounded too good to be true. But she didn't express that thought in those words but changed them a little. Will it work? Don't underestimate the pathway you're on now, Serena. The Beyonders on that path have a very good memory. The monarch laughed softly with amusement. Why don't we do a little test? Go ahead. Ask a question. Pressing her lips together, Serena thought for a few moments about the question she wanted to ask. After about 7 seconds, she asked, what is? No, not like that. The monarch cut her off, amused, pray for that answer. Understanding what he was saying, Serena quickly went to her kitchen and quickly searched for a silver knife. Finding one in one of the drawers, she ran to her room and locked the door again. Once that was done, she closed her eyes and drew her spirituality to the tip of the knife, and walked from corner to corner of the rug where the altar was, creating a wall of spirituality. How to create a wall of spirituality came with the knowledge brought by the potion. Her method was the same one she had seen her savior use. With that done, she knelt in front of the altar she had used a moment ago, relit the candles, and closed her eyes as she clasped her hands in front of her face in reverence. The Scarlet Monarch who burns depravity, the calamity forgotten by time, the stranger that comes from the unknown, your faithful servant prays for your attention, I pray for revelation. Please reveal to me the interchangeable paths of the secret supplicant pathway. The correct way to ask for information had also been injected into her brain after becoming a secret supplicant, along with some basic ancient languages for praying correctly. Having been asked in the correct way, the candles on the altar flickered for a moment before the Scarlet Monarch's voice echoed in her mind. The interchangeable paths of the secret supplicant pathway are the spectator, sailor, reader, and bard pathways. Spectator. That's the path that little Jerry is on. Noticing this, Serena gasped in surprise. I didn't think my path had so many options. Although, aren't there a bit too many? While the variety was good, she couldn't help thinking it was over the top. While she was in her serious criticism, she couldn't help but pause momentarily and gasp of surprise and amazement. Something inside her was reacting. My lord, I feel something melting inside me as you speak. Is this the digestion the boss was talking about? A soft laugh sounded in her mind. That is the core of the secret supplicant. Don't you think? The name is quite revealing, after all. Of course. Secret supplicant. The core of this path is to supplicate a mysterious existence for information. Perhaps the greater the secret, the faster the potion will digest. Serena was illuminated, and a huge smile blossomed on her face. If she could digest her potion quickly and catch up on her knowledge, she would no longer be useless. Maybe she could even excel. Her savior said everyone had to be in sequence 7 before leaving Lindbergh. Maybe if she managed to reach sequence 6, she would be praised and set as an example. At such good news, Serena prostrated before the altar and wept in joy. Thank you, my lord. I will make sure to pray to you constantly and faithfully. You will be my only God. Welcome then, Serena Williams. Although she couldn't see it, Serena was sure the monarch was smiling. Just remember what I said. Only to pray to you and for nothing in the world to listen to the other whispers. I remember. Serena said gracefully with a brilliant smile and eyes shining in the shadows. Perfect. Then we're ready. Just one more thing. Don't tell anyone about your path. Not even the others. This is something that can only stay between Adrian, you, and me. Her brow furrowed a little. Remembering how she had to act, the woman prostrated herself before the altar. Tell me, my lord. Why is that? Your path is one controlled by an evil god, the true creator. If someone discovers your path before the time is right, it would undoubtedly bring trouble for everyone, especially for Adrian. Serena visibly paled. Trouble for Mr. Adrian. She was filled with sheer horror, and the woman began to breathe heavily. She would kill herself before that happened. Prostrating herself even more profoundly on the floor, her forehead scraped forcefully against the carpet. Until the right moment arrives, I will take this secret to the grave if necessary. I hope so. The monarch sighed a little. Also, think of this as a way of acting. A secret supplicant must be a secret after all. At the amused tone, Serena could only nod, still somewhat pale. I will give it my all. Then I will be waiting for your prayers. Get some rest today, but if anything happens or whispers appear, do not hesitate to pray, I will come for you. By your will. Serena did not immediately get up from her place, only when the feeling of being observed vanished did she dare to get up. She calmly cleaned the whole place of the elements, taking down the altar and hiding the materials used. Once she had done that, she undid the wall of spirituality. Returning to her bed, she lay down and closed her eyes to deal with the spirituality her body had exceeded after the promotion.